Since the beginning of time, man has observed and searched for answers in the heavens. Our relationship with what we saw and what we thought we saw has changed throughout time. Historians and scientists have evidence that shows that even Neolithic humans had a system of measuring astronomical events. Man has stared out into the sky, surrounded by the engulfing vastness of everything, and asked questions. Where are we? What are we? How did we get here? Why can't we go somewhere else? What's out there, and are we alone? Through the power of the human spirit and much turmoil, we have managed to venture out and learn. However, there are still questions we can't answer. This search for existential truth has led men and women to do extraordinary things as a species. Overall, while I don't think this search for answers has been the sole driver of progress, we definitely still have an innate drive to know more, and it has helped us along. Business leaders and government systems have tried to make use of this search for knowledge. In the world today, around 70% of research funds come from the private sector, while the rest come from government entities and universities. This funding inadvertently allows for control of the information that comes out, and that control is what worries certain people. Some people go as far as to say that we are actively being lied to, and that there is planet-shaking information being hidden from common people. This discrepancy of knowledge havers and knowledge wanters has led to a rise of speculation, and an increase in theories of hidden truth and powerful lies. These theories have grown and entered the mainstream. It isn't uncommon for someone to talk about the moon landing conspiracies and chemtrails, and what's really going on in the skies over a secret military base in the middle of the Nevada desert called Area 51. That last one is the focus of this episode. What has been going on for over 70 years under the American people's noses? Why has the government only recently even admitted that the site existed? Are UFOs a sign of alien life? Who is Bob Lazar and what has he seen? What does this all say about ourselves? Follow me, and let's come down this rabbit hole. First, we need to investigate the history of UFO thought in the US. It all started on October 30th, 1938. On this day, CBS began a radio drama broadcast of the book The War of the Worlds, where realism was the goal. The only indication that it was a drama was at the beginning by Orson Welles himself.
Affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds.
After that, the radio play began. Music played and drama presented itself as a regular nightly reporting of the news. Eventually, the broadcast was interrupted by news reporters talking about explosions in the sky and toxic gases descending on New York and huge tripods attacking the northeastern United States. There was even a portion where a broadcaster was vaporized mid-sentence, and radio silence followed.
People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies.
For the people who tuned in after the broadcast began and missed the introduction, this was the end of the world. A real-life alien invasion. Some households were thoroughly panicked and called into police stations to get more information on how to protect themselves. Policemen ended up storming the CBS radio station where it was being broadcast. Eventually, Orson Welles had to apologize to the nation. While the US wasn't destroyed by the commotion it caused, the American government took notice of the incident. Here it saw that the US population as a whole was susceptible to collective shock and paranoia. This was a tense world in the 30s and 40s, and Americans having a meltdown and acting disorderly would not do the nation good in a real invasion, terrestrial or extraterrestrial. A lesson was learned during this broadcast and the subsequent couple days. Volatile information had to be kept out of the public eye if the US was to run smoothly. Over the next decade or so, the world would change dramatically. War had propelled science into dangerous areas, and the potential for world destruction was as real as ever. 2 bombs changed the way global politics works forever. What's more is espionage and secrecy of these bombs had led to clandestine research groups and the implementation of a need-to-know government attitude on information. While all of this was happening in DC, other phenomena around the country were starting to create ripple effects of public interest. Among the most famous has become the most widely studied UFO event in the world. During the end of the 40s, something crashed into the New Mexico desert. Even in my research for this episode, what exactly that something was seems to be hotly debated. The official government museum and research complex, the Smithsonian, holds that a metallic weather balloon crashed into the desert near Roswell, New Mexico. Other historians seem to hold that it was actually an advanced Russian plane that slipped through American radar. Some would say that it was an extraterrestrial ship of aliens from another planet. The timeline of events goes as follows. On June 14, 1947, William Roswell discovered some debris some 30 miles out of Roswell, New Mexico. He initially didn't think much of it, but a few weeks later, on July 4th, he returned and picked up what was still there. During this time, and the previous few weeks, some people had witnessed and reported what they described as a flying saucer in the skies. The next day, on July 5th, William Roswell is in town and tells the sheriff of the town that he may have found what others were describing. This was relayed to the Roswell Army Airfield, and on July 7th, Major Jesse Marshall and a man in plain clothes showed up at Roswell's door to see what he had in the back of his pickup truck. The major takes what he had and then goes back to the crash site to look for more debris. They tried to reconstruct whatever it was and couldn't. The next day, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release announcing, "The rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc." This message went across the country, and news stories went to press discussing the ramifications of this discovery. People from New York to Sacramento were reading about some strange disc that had crash-landed in the desert. It seemed like something big was about to be let out, and the paranoia of these UFOs was justified. Immediately, Colonel William Blanchard of the Fort Worth Army Air Force Base ordered the debris to be flown to him. Once it arrived, Warrant Officer Irving Newton identified the object as a weather balloon, and another press release was issued the next day on July 9th. According to the Army, this object was a weather balloon and nothing more. And at this point, the story basically died, and all the hype that was built was shot. Interestingly, afterwards, Roswell was interviewed by the local newspaper where he said, "I am sure that what I found was not any weather balloon. But if I find anything else besides a bomb, they're going to have a hard time getting me to say anything about it." He regretted the whole experience, and the process had him wanting to stay quiet. Roswell is among the most famous cases, but these UFO sightings continued. The US military was concerned at the ramification of these potential UFOs, and couldn't again be the last to find out about things going on across the country. From there, Project Sign, a secret US Air Force study investigating UFOs, was born. This study was followed by Project Drudge and Project Blue Book. All of these studies investigated stories that were getting passed along the public about UFOs. Scientific analysis and in-depth psychological interviews were conducted on witnesses of events, and possible explanations were attempted. These studies were conducted through the 50s and 60s to get a leg up on the information going public all the time about UFOs, but also had a side task of controlling the public opinion of UFOs. Under the control of Dr. H.P. Robertson, the group attempted to observe, investigate, and even mock civilian UFO interest groups. including attempting to use mass media, celebrities, and even the Walt Disney Company to ridicule and put forward explanations about UFO sightings. Whatever the panel found, they were aimed at controlling that information. In December 1953, Joint Army, Navy, Air Force Regulation No. 146 made it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. The project eventually led to the Condon Report, a full scientific study on UFOs completed at the University of Colorado under the direction of the U.S. Air Force. The report served to proclaim an academic stance on the UFO phenomenon, that it was basically all discreditable and shouldn't be taken seriously. With this report, any academic interest in UFOs basically died, and the only people left investigating UFOs were civilian groups and secret government studies. This report didn't come without its open critics. Most notably was a man by the name of J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer and one of the scientists under Dr. Robertson on the various government studies. He began on the project as a total skeptic and left it once he realized that there may be more there than what he expected. He resented the fact that the Air Force would not accept the possibility of UFOs, and that there were reliable people who were giving stories who were made to feel like idiots for discussing it. He hated the idea of shame and ridicule being part of the scientific process. He came to realize that while most stories could be explained away, not everything could. That last bit of accounts that had been heavily studied and still no answers could be determined worried him. Was there something out there? Why was the US Air Force so determined to say, it's all fake? Until his death in 1985, Hynek studied UFOs in search for truth. While the military would have liked to have people stop discussing UFOs, the American fascination with space and what lies beyond was just beginning. In 1957, the Soviet satellite Sputnik completed its first low Earth orbit, and with its monotonous beep, the space age had dawned. If an observer looked in the right spot and had a good eye, you could actually see the metallic beach ball going across the sky. Many people claimed to be able to see the satellite even though they wouldn't have been able to based on the positioning, and for its 21-day mission, the US was shook. Americans were watching the sky like never before, and not as casual observers. The American people started seeing things that were not explainable in the moment. While prestigious media was taking UFO stories as lowbrow, other papers were presenting the stories. Papers like the National Enquirer and World News were regularly publishing and over-dramatizing UFO stories. While this kept UFOs in a bit of a conspiratorial light, it still showed that the general public still had a fascination about this phenomena. Independent groups had formed and serious investigation of accounts, photos, and videos were being done. This picked up heavily in the 80s and 90s when it started becoming mainstream to discuss UFOs, and everyone seemed to have a story about the time they saw something in the sky they couldn't explain. The theories developed into stories of alien visitors, human abductions, secret bases, and governmental cover-ups. The latter being the most important to this discussion because there has been evidence that the US government has had an interest in these sightings and made direct attempts to kill the stories. However, one location that seemed to be an enigma in the world of UFOs until its unexpected public divulgence in the late 80s has created quite the story, and in a sense, it has become the center of the UFO discussion. Area 51. Area 51 is part of the Nevada Test Site, a Connecticut-sized piece of land that is owned and operated by the US government. The site has many sections and names, among them Paradise Ranch, Groom Lake, Dreamland, and the S4. This site is off-limits to civilians, and no one besides those who needed to know even knew that it existed. That all changed in 1989. George Knapp was a reporter for the local Las Vegas news station, KLAS. In this time, he had been interested in UFOs and other related phenomena. In 1987, he did an interview with John Lear, a famous aviator and a member of an influential Nevada family. Lear became a big-time ufologist after family members of his reported sightings of UFOs. His claims were pretty wild, but they were interesting enough to catch the attention of Knapp, and in an interview he mentions everything from abductions to plans on aliens making the human race cattle for their own purposes. After the interview, Knapp remained in contact with Lear. Many years later, Knapp had scheduled an interview in May of 1989. However, the interviewee canceled at last second. Knapp ended up contacting Lear for someone else to interview. Lear knew of a man that would be a great fit. George Knapp ended up conducting an occulted interview with a man solely known as Dennis. The initial interview appeared only in local programming of Las Vegas. In this 4-minute interview, Dennis discussed things that would catch the attention of people all around the world. Dennis told the world of a secret base in the Nevada desert just north of Las Vegas. At this secret base, there were 9 flying saucers of extraterrestrial origin. These discs were being studied, and the government was trying to reverse engineer with the purpose of understanding its anti-gravity capabilities. He mentioned that they were taking a few apart to study them, but others were still operational. What's more is that this man said he had seen them fly, and that they were like nothing he had ever seen before. The world was rocked, and this video caught the attention of a lot of people. After he told the story anonymously, he ended up doing various interviews with George Knapp, and together they talked about his knowledge of this secret base. This man's name was Bob Lazar, and as Bob told it, he had originally worked as an engineer and physicist at the Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory. During a lecture being held in 1982, Bob Lazar met Edward Teller. Teller was a nuclear physicist that had worked and led the Manhattan Project, and was a giant in the field of both nuclear physics and secret government projects. Time went on, and throughout the next couple of years, Bob Lazar's life would go downhill. He divorced his wife, he had been fired from Los Alamos, and started doing photo development work in Vegas. Lazar, at this low, needed a new job and a fresh start. He started looking for engineering work again and eventually contacted Teller after so many years of having not spoken to him. Teller got him a job at Area 51 through a private military contractor called EG&G. The work he had done for EG&G was short but intense. He started in December of 1988, and according to Lazar, he was being tasked with the understanding of an anti-gravity propulsion system that had been pulled off of a flying saucer. This system was housed at S4. He was also briefed on the supposed craft and some of the progress that was made. Things like that the craft came from a civilization from the Alpha Reticuli star system. The information that he was given was probably specific to him, however, and this was for security purposes. And he was never given any more information than what was necessary. He didn't know anything besides what he needed to know, and that is the way the government wanted it. He was able to witness it in action. He watched a trained military pilot attempt to fly the craft that was apparently silent and moved in interesting ways. It moved basically belly first, aiming itself in a way no known craft could fly. He used this information in his study of the propulsion system and was given no other information. He did know, however, the flight schedule and when they would test it. The work that he had was not constant. He would get a call and be told to be at the McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, where he would be flown into work. He worked approximately 10 days scattered from December to March. While he was sworn to secrecy, he felt uncomfortable with the information. He felt that his life was falling apart as a result of the secrecy that he was sworn to maintain. His wife thought he was having an affair, and in response, started an affair of retaliation. Eventually, Bob broke the oath that thousands of others had kept and told his wife and 2 of their friends, one of them being the ufologist John Lear, what he was doing at this secret base. Bob told them about the work he was doing, but he wanted to prove it to them. So, on a dark night, he took them to an area near Highway 375 where they could see a planned flight of one of the crafts. They all say that they saw a craft that lifted up, flew around unnaturally, and landed again. Bewildered and amazed by what they saw, they came back the next week to see it again. They ended up returning a third time on April 2nd, 1989, where they were finally caught. Bob Lazar and the people with him were detained by private security, taken to the sheriff's office, and were eventually let go. The next day, Bob Lazar was interviewed by EG&G. He was told that he was fired, that he was never to speak of what he saw, and that if he did speak, there would be consequences. They had shown him evidence that they had been tapping his phones and that they were monitoring him 24/7. Sometime later, as Bob Lazar was driving, his back tire was shot out. Bob felt really unsafe, and as a result, thought that his best collateral was to tell his story. It would go one of two ways. Either his story protects him by putting him in the public eye, or he tells the truth and he goes missing sometime later. But at least the information got out. Eventually, he got in contact with George Knapp, and the story went live for the world to hear.
Exactly what's going on up there?
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
This was the first time ever that the world had heard of Area 51, and shortly after, the fanaticism that followed was incredible. Suddenly, Area 51 and the UFO stories coming around that area were a point of interest to thousands of ufologists who felt vindicated in all their reports and things that they had been seeing. Their stories now had some backing by someone who had not only seen these things firsthand, but that had worked on the technology. This exposure of government secrets by a supposed confidential insider externally seemed to get little response from the US that didn't even accept the claim that Area 51 existed. However, the US government has its own story to this whole thing, involving UFOs and Area 51 and the control of information. And the story as to why the government has been so fascinated by the UFO stories tells a lot about the time and the fear that existed. Since the end of the Second World War, the US had a new enemy on its hands, one that wasn't fighting conventionally. Since the droppings of the bombs at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the world fell into a different age. The potential for the end of the world was seen, and what's more, it was actively being searched by those who didn't have it. The USSR was ready and willing to match the US as a technological rival and had every intention of surpassing the US in every possible way. This became a Cold War of ideology, scientific prowess, military dominance, human potential, and, most importantly, information. Remember that UFO that crashed in the New Mexico desert at Roswell? According to the military, it was actually an advanced experimental and secret nuclear missile detection system known as Project Mogul, and that's why it looks so different than the weather balloons. However, the US couldn't allow its information to be disseminated. Soviet spies were all over the US and they regularly read US press. They weren't about to announce that actually that was a secret project that had come down, and now the whole world would know something more about US capabilities. The more in the dark you kept the public, the more in the dark you kept the enemy. All the investigation into UFOs was actually of government importance for 2 reasons. First, the US needed to investigate whether or not the Soviets were using advanced flying technology over the US. These new sorts of crafts could be so advanced that they would not appear as normal things in the sky. In fact, these sightings helped the US better track if the Soviets were spying on the US. Some even say that the Soviets used UFO stories to sow discord and chaos in the US system, playing on the fear that was seen during the War of the Worlds broadcast in the 40s. The Soviets could use the hysteria that would be caused to their advantage, and the US knew this. The second aspect to this was Area 51 and all the work that was being done there. Area 51, according to government records acquired through the Freedom of Information Act, interviews with ex-employees and investigative journalists, was founded in the 50s and has had many owners and operators. Initially, it was used to secretly test nuclear weapons in an area far from large populations. Later on, it became home of the joint CIA and Air Force secret plane program. This was the U-2, and at the time, it was the most state-of-the-art plane the world had ever seen. This, along with Project Oxcart, another secret and advanced tech plane developed by the CIA and Air Force, constituted some of the advanced work and tech that was developed and maintained over the years at the Nevada test site. This site wasn't even fully admitted as being real by the US government, until it begrudgingly gave records of the Lockheed U-2 spy reconnaissance program through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2005. Since then, the only president to ever even mention Area 51 was Barack Obama in 2013. Overall, the secrecy and hidden nature of the region around Groom Lake and its exemptions from EPA mandates and litigative action leaves one to imagine what could be hiding behind the fences of probably the most openly known yet enigmatic places on Earth. So now we've investigated and heard both stories. First, those of the ufologists and the paranormal investigators, and second, that of the US government and all the reasons they had to hide information. What we choose to believe now can affect the way that we continue looking at the world. The UFO question remains at large. What are these UFOs? Why do they fascinate us so much? These sightings have not just been happening to wacky tinfoil hat types in the middle of nowhere. One of the most compelling stories is that of US Navy Commander David Fravor, who saw the famous Tic Tac UFO off the coast of San Diego, California. He was the commanding officer of his squadron and was tasked with flying a state-of-the-art $70 million machine through the air. I don't suspect he is just saying these things for attention. New reports come out all the time, and it's apparently very common for airmen to have such encounters with things like these. We don't know what we are seeing, but I suspect you, or someone you know, has seen something strange in the sky that couldn't be easily explained. Debunkers work around the clock finding ways to break down these stories, and while many can be explained away, some can't. And those are the ones that stick with us and make us question what we think is out there. It's interesting that with all the history and all the research that civilian researchers have done on UFOs, we are convinced that the government has the answer we are searching for. UFO questions have been asked to all US presidents since the huge wave of interest that was generated in the 80s and 90s. Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump have all gotten this type of question, and yet we're still without a definitive answer. In 2016, while on Jimmy Kimmel Live, then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton said that if she was elected, she would release information on the US investigations into UFOs. What's more is she had this to say.
We had your husband, President Clinton, on this show. He said, I asked him about UFOs and Area 51, and if he looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And you know, there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon, really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Well, I think we can use them interchangeably, but I would like us to go into those files and hopefully make as much of that public as possible. If there's nothing there, let's tell people there's nothing there.
What if there is something there?
Well, if there is something there, unless it's a threat to national security, I think we ought to share it with the public.
Truthfully, I think she was just blowing smoke. And I think it's a bit naive to expect the president to know. Maybe it's just a small circle inside the Pentagon, or a team of researchers at Area 51. That information should be kept as secret as possible, since the ramifications of releasing such information could be wild. The hush-hush and explain-it-away attitude of the US government and military is changing. In the past, the US was interested in what these things were, only in regards to their threat to national security and their effect on the US population's ability to function. In 2019, however, the Navy officially said it was investigating a couple of videos that didn't seem to be fabricated, and that couldn't be explained away easily. This was the first time the US military had publicly declared it was going to take these sightings by soldiers and airmen more seriously. It was establishing a system of reporting and would be thoroughly and openly investigating claims. As humans, we seek comfort from our lack of understanding. We want the world to be orderly and fair and understood. When we find things that are outside that nice and clean worldview, we get on the defensive and try to find a way of answering it. Some people go on the skeptical defensive and explain it all away. Some people just push it out of their minds. Some others try to delve in and seek for the answers. And when those answers are unsatisfactory, we try to explain those answers and then keep this circular loop of logic alive. All of this rationale doesn't solve the apparent issue of the phenomenon existing, and that both excites and terrifies us. What is the real truth behind the things we don't understand? And what will it take to find the truth? Are UFOs real? Are all these things that we're seeing just an elaborate hoax? Are these just part of a bigger scheme by the government to try to control us? Is there secret information that we don't have? Are we alone in the universe? These are just some of the starting questions, and a place to get your footing if you want to dig deeper down this rabbit hole. I invite you to, and after, come back and tell me what you find.